My older brother Mark disappeared when I was just 7. The last memory I have of him comes from a lazy Saturday afternoon in the summer of 2008. He was lying in our backyard porch with a bunch of his high school friends, eating ice cream cones and arguing about horror movies or something. I don't know, I never paid much attention to the conversations, but I do know they were excited about going to their first real party later that night. I came outside to give Mark a gift. It was a charm bracelet I'd made for him from a series of strung-together Lego blocks. For good luck, I told him. Mark looked at the bracelet. I'd scrawled letters on it in Sharpie, 1 letter per block. Together they spelled out Mookie, my nickname for him since I was a toddler. Mark just laughed and pocketed the bracelet. "Thanks, Smelly," he said, tussling my hair. I remember yelling at him and growing red in the face. And then I ran back inside. "Don't call me that," I yelled. Those were the last words I ever said to my brother. Mark and his friends were headed to the Swamp soiree that night. A tradition in Bartram Forest High School. Every year, a group of popular seniors would throw a big end-of-the-summer bash in the outskirts of the Okee-Goby Swamp, a massive wilderness area in northern Florida, about a half hour from our home in suburban Jacksonville. The soiree was basically a big kegger with a bonfire where everyone got drunk, smoked pot, and hooked up in their cars, or, if they were really wasted, in the mud. The area was remote enough that no police ever came by, and there was no locals to piss off. The party's exact location was kept secret, shared only to those fortunate enough to be invited. Swamp soirees were known for their lethal amount of alcohol and drugs. The kids who threw them always came from wealthy families. They'd brought multiple kegs of Blue Moon or Stella, handles of top-shelf liquor, bags of dank-ass weed, and occasionally cocaine. Mark and his friends arrived early that night, before most others had shown up. According to his friends, some douchey baseball player pressured him into doing a 20-second keg stand. Shortly afterwards, Mark told his friends that he was going to take a piss. He looked pale and sweaty, like he was going to throw up, his friend Eric told me years later. The last time anyone saw him, Mark was stumbling around in the darkened woods, headed deeper into the Okee-Goby Swamp. 2 hours later, his friends drunkenly searched the same wilderness, calling out his name while sinking halfway into the mud. 2 days later, my parents searched the area with local law enforcement. 2 weeks later, a 400-person search and rescue operation combed the Okee-Goby Swamp, equipped with helicopters, John boats, and multiple foot teams. And 2 years later, the final official search ended, this time with cadaver dogs. No one ever found anything. It was like Mark had vanished from existence entirely. One moment there was a smart, sci-fi-obsessed teenager who wanted to design robots that explored distant planets, get married, and raise 3.5 kids while living in Miami. And the next moment, nothing. Blue, place your unit. You smell. I never participated in any official search for my brother. I was too young, but years later, when I was in college at Florida State, I applied for a summer internship at the Okee-Goby National Park, in part to look for anything that might have been missed. I'd always been interested in the wilderness, even though my parents never let me go camping or hiking after what happened. They wouldn't even let me play in the woods of our backyards, but that only made me long for such places even more. Mark loved being outside. Being in the wild was one of the only ways to keep his spirit alive. One of my earliest memories was of us hiking together on the trails at Guana River State Park. We'd run ahead of our parents till it was just us in the wild green world full of sprawling oaks, wide marshes, and endless mystery. As kids, we fantasized about running away to live in the woods, like a modern-day version of Swiss Family Robinson. We'd never have to go to school. We could stay up as late as we wanted. It'd be total freedom. When I went in for my first interview at the Okee-Goby Park headquarters, the head interp ranger, George Craig, saw my last name and raised his eyebrow. Ellie Brooks? I'm the little sibling of Mark Brooks, I said, answering the question that was forming in his bald head. I helped lead the first search party for him, he explained. Really sad. Very sorry for your loss. Thanks, I told him. I was using the internship as a way of coping with his loss. He hired me on the spot. The job was simple enough. Most of it consisted of manning the park museum, the gift shops, and talking to the visitors. They would come in to browse the dioramas on swamp wildlife or peruse books on bird watching. The park received visitors from all over the country, but most were locals from the nearby towns of Okee, population 604. They were usually older folks who were retired, stopping by day after day just to talk. These locals had all sorts of crazy stories about the Okee-Goby Swamp. It turned out Okee was known for two things: its massive paper mill, which gives the area a noxious fart smell when the wind blows north to south, and its town mascot, the infamous Swamp Rex. Okee sits along the eastern edge of the Okee-Goby Swamp. It's the only human civilization within 50 miles of the wilderness. As such, the town has experienced many unusual animal encounters over the years. Everyone who's ever owned a swimming pool there found a full-grown alligator floating in it at least once. Water moccasins sometimes coiled up in the town's roads to catch warmth in the winter. And locals love to say how the deer population vastly outnumbered the human one. But not all creatures could be explained. Since as far back as 1889, people in the area talked of an 8-foot-tall humanoid alligator. One that roamed the swamps at night, killing anyone who littered, polluted, or otherwise disrespected the natural ecosystem. They called it the Swamp Rex. Most reports stated that the creature had glowing green eyes, a long, powerful tail that could break bone, and an elongated head full of spear-like crocodilian teeth. The Swamp Rex would hunt at night, then return to its muddy hole somewhere deep inside the swamp where no one feared to tread. I first learned of the Swamp Rex from my older brother. As a child, Mark was fascinated with cryptozoology, the study of unverified creatures like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster. He used to tell me campfire stories about the Rex when we were little, how it was millions of years old, would travel throughout the swamp via series of underground caves. The story scared the bejeevus out of me, but I loved every second of it. He told me once that he wanted to go on an expedition into the heart of the Okee-Goby to find the creature. I was the only other person who wanted to go with him. It sounded like the perfect adventure, like something out of my favorite movie, Jurassic Park. Mark and I never went on that expedition, though. He lost interest in stupid fake monsters by the time he was a senior in high school. I doubted the Rex was even on his mind when he attended the swamp soiree that fateful night. Mark never saw the Swamp Rex, but many others have claimed that they've seen it over the years, even though the legend dated back to the newspaper article in the late 1800s. It didn't really become known until March of 1989, when Okee sugarcane farmer Bill Howard noticed a tall man wandering the edge of his property late one autumn evening. Howard lived on a remote farm on the outskirts of town, right next to the Okee-Goby Swamp. If it was a man, he'd have to walk miles through mighty thick woods just to get to my backyard, Howard told reporters. Keeping his eyes on the figure, the farmer grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun and a camcorder that he'd recently got for Christmas. I knew right away something wasn't right about it. It stood like a man, but it had this big tail and it moved with kind of a animal grace, he said. Instead of aiming his gun, Howard raised his camcorder and shot the first known footage of the Swamp Rex. The creature only appeared for about 5 seconds on screen before fleeing deeper into the woods. It was somewhat hard to make out, given the footage was shot from 100 yards away and during the twilight, but even with a low-resolution 1980s-era camera, people could see the figure had a tail and an elongated head, just like the Swamp Rex stories of old. Soon afterwards, Bill Howard's footage aired on the local news and gradually spread throughout the country via cryptozoological outlets like the Weekly World News and nascent internet forums on the paranormal. Eventually, the creature made its way into greater pop culture. In the 1990s, The X-File aired a Monster of the Week episode loosely based on the Rex, and the History Channel did a special on it for its Monster Quest series in 2009. Over time, tourists started showing up in Okee, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature themselves. Various gift shops opened up, selling all kinds of Swamp Rex merchandise, from t-shirts to mugs to alligator hats, even Swamp Rex IPA beer. People came from all over the country. Most were skeptics, just looking for a wacky Florida story to tell. But some were true believers. Many even believed that Rex was involved in real-life disappearances tied to the Okee-Goby area. Since 1980, over 50 people have gone missing in or around the swamp, including my older brother. The most famous case happened in the early 1990s, when a wealthy land developer named Jerry Flagler vanished after witnesses last saw him in the Okee-Goby area with some business partners. He was going to illegally cut down them trees, Okee's town historian Mary Madrigal told reporters. But the Rex took him before he could. Like Mark, the authorities never found Flagler's body. By 2019, when I was working at the Okee-Goby National Park, the Swamp Rex had become a vital part of Okee's lore. A cartoon version of it was even featured on the town sign, though they didn't know my relation. Many of the locals who visited the park would tell me stories about what really happened to Mark Brooks. Most of them believed the Swamp Rex took my brother because he was disrespecting the land by being at the swamp soiree. How come it didn't take anyone else then? I would ask, innocently. There were at least 100 other kids at that party that night. The locals usually didn't have an answer to the question, or they'd make up some bullshit excuse like, well, maybe he was the only one littering. The only drunken high school student who littered. My brother was officially pronounced dead on July 12th, 2012. His cause of death was listed as probable drowning. The only theory that seemed reasonable. The area where Mark was last seen had a lot of deep pools of water connecting to the Okee River. Given his level of inebriation at the time, it was easy to assume he'd simply fallen into such pools. Mark never learned to swim, so then his body was later washed out to sea via the river, which runs from the Okee-Goby Swamp to the Gulf of Mexico. Even though I didn't believe the Swamp Rex theory, like Mark before me, I'd come to the realization that monsters were always a hoax or a cause of mistaken identity. I still couldn't quite live with the drowning explanation. I needed something more. Another part of my job was called roving, where I walked the trails and the boardwalks of the Okee-Goby National Park, talking to visitors and looking for anything suspect. I did this a few times a week. I didn't carry a firearm. That was for law enforcement, rangers only, not intrepid ones, and definitely not someone doing a college internship. But I did have a high-powered radio that could contact an LE in case of emergencies, and I always wore a flat hat, something you've probably seen from many Smokey the Bear ads, so hikers could spot me a mile away. Sometimes they asked about wildlife and the history of the swamp. Most of the time they came to complain about the lack of certain facilities, like trash cans. I roved the wilderness of the Okee-Goby Swamp for one reason. I was determined to find something, anything, any remnant of my brother's existence, even if it was just the stupid charm bracelet I'd given him the day he disappeared. I knew all the search parties before me had covered the same ground, but there was still plenty of stories of someone finding clues in the exact same location people had searched years earlier. It was possible. It had to be. A few months in my job, I was roving the North Boardwalk when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A flash of movement. It looked like a lanky teenager, the figure dashed out into the surrounding cypress trees, disappearing into an area that was usually flooded. I half expected the runaway to sink waist deep into the mud. This was late March, and it hadn't rained in a month. The land was as dry as it could get, and the mysterious individual had moved expertly through it. I reached for my radio, planning to call in the incident. Someone's gone off the designated trail, I would have said. In most situations, this is something an LE ranger would handle, but something made me put the radio down. A lingering feeling. That kid. Was it a boy? He looked almost like Mark. I should have taken it as a warning sign. And I wish I just radioed the LE ranger. Instead, I stepped off the boardwalk and I started into the woods. There was nothing in the area where the figure was headed. My NPS map just showed a blank spot on the northern edge of the swamp. Because of its extreme density and uninhabitable terrain, almost half of the Okee-Goby is uncharted. Most of its land is hidden beneath 4 feet of murky brown water and another 5 feet of black muck. Too difficult to walk through for any detailed surveys. I looked for the kid in the cypress trees ahead, but I couldn't see any movement. I did see the occasional shoe print in the mud, however. It looked like a Converse shoe. Definitely not something that you'd want in such terrain. The intermittent tracks led deeper and deeper into the swamp. I came across one every 10 or 20 yards. At one point, I stopped to take a drink from my bottle, and was shocked to see a full 2 hours had passed. It was almost 5 p.m. Shit! I was supposed to be back at the park headquarters to start closing procedure 30 minutes ago. How is it already 5? It felt like I'd stepped off the boardwalk only moments before. I started to backtrack. I planned to let an Ellie know about the lost kid, but first, I needed an excuse for being so late. Was I helping a lost hiker find his way back to the trailhead? Did I have to clean up a bunch of trash on the boardwalk? I was about to radio headquarters when I felt my boots slip out from under me, and I stumbled down a small muddy hill. My body crashed through a dense thicket of palmetto bushes. Dazed, I struggled to my feet, wiped off as much dirt as I could. My green slacks and gray-collared shirt had turned black from muck. My flat hat was crushed, my radio was cracked and unusable. And my cell phone was caked in mud. But as soon as I saw my surroundings, I forgot about everything else. I was inside a campsite, almost an acre in size. The place was astonishing and had an old canvas tent, pitched between a sprawling live oak, a fire pit, small garden, a composite station, a dugout latrine, even a plastic tarp for catching rainwater. A series of large ceramic jars stood by the rain catcher. They looked to be storing water. There was no one around. The tent was empty, but I could tell the site was still inhabited. Everything was well maintained, and the fire pit had some recently burned coals in its center. Who could be living here? I wondered. Was it the boy I was chasing? Was he hiding in the bushes somewhere nearby, afraid of getting caught? No, whoever had been living in that site had been there for years, perhaps even decades. The camp was surrounded by dense palmetto bushes and the makeshift wall of driftwood. It was so well camouflaged that I realized I had already walked past it before falling down the hill. "Hello?" I said tentatively. There was no response. Cicadas droned from the nearby trees. I was about to leave when something along the far edge of the camp caught my attention. It appeared to be a crude statue carved out of an old tree trunk and decorated with various objects. As I approached, its details came into focus. A statue depicted a humanoid figure with an alligator head, a large, muscular tail, clearly meant to be the Swamp Rex. There were various objects around it. Some had been laid at the creature's feet, a moldy tennis shoe, a broken compass, part of a child's lunchbox. Others were draped over its body. Baseball cap, canteen, golden necklace bearing a cross. They were arrayed in a specific pattern as if the statue were some kind of shrine. I crept closer, almost mesmerized by the mysterious display. And that's when I saw it. A bracelet, made of Lego blocks, hanging around the statue's left wrist. My breath stopped. All noise faded. I reached out and I grabbed the bracelet. The letters were faint, but still legible. Mookie. It was the very bracelet I'd given my older brother the day he disappeared. My skin felt prickly with fear and worry. I put the bracelet in my vest pocket and then turned around, looking in all directions. Mark? There was no response. The campsite was perfectly still. My eyes scanned the tent, the garden, the compost heap, the latrine, A male figure, hidden in shadow, standing at the edge of the woods, motionless. I gasped. How long had he been there? It was too dark to make out the man's features. Could it be... Mark? Somehow I already knew the answer. There was a loud hiss, and very slowly the figure stepped into the light. A 6-foot-tall man, mid to late 50s, with a muscular frame, scraggly gray hair. A hermit. His wiry body was covered in dirt, mud, and bug bites, and he was completely naked. The hermit stared at me with bloodshot eyes, his expression unreadable. Angry? Scared? Confused? My stomach retched with fear. Every alarm bell in my brain was ringing simultaneously. Sorry, I stammered, backing away with my hands up. I didn't mean to. I can leave. The hermit opened his cracked lips to reveal rotten, yellowed teeth. He hissed, producing a noise so low and resonant it sounded like a giant snake. I jumped back, falling on my behind at the foot of the shrine. No, please! But the hermit didn't attack. Instead, he grabbed something from within the tent. Something big. It looked like a pile of clothes. When he brought it out, I nearly screamed. It was a suit made of thick, reptilian skin. The hermit had it stitched together, pieces of alligator hide to form a swamp rex costume. It had long sleeves that ended in clawed gloves, a hood made of an alligator skull, webbed feet, even a tail. The monster suit was ugly as sin, but also intricate, terrifying, mesmerizing. The hermit started to put it on. His movements were slow and deliberate, like this was all part of some ritual. What are you? I crawled backwards, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. My fingers brushed against a piece of driftwood. A potential weapon. The hermit stepped forward, wearing his swamp rex suit. He looked like a mutant from the bowels of hell. The man hissed again, his voice amplified by the gator skull. It was louder, more guttural. I grabbed a hold of the driftwood piece and stood up. The branch was small but solid, like a billy club. I raised it up defensively, and Mark's bracelet fell from my vest pocket. The hermit stared at the bracelet and hissed again. He took a step back. Cautiously, I picked up the bracelet with my free hand and held it out so the hermit could see it more clearly. It hung loosely from my fingertips. Where did you get this? No response. Do you know Mark Brooks? I asked again, trying to sound a bit more confident. With his gloved hand, the hermit pointed to the ceramic jars standing beneath the rain catcher. The ones that held water. I don't understand. Can you speak? The hermit didn't say anything. He walked over to the jars, his reptilian hands brushing across the top of each one until he tipped the last jar over. Crash! A gallon of slimy liquid poured out, along with a pile of big, white sticks. No, not sticks. Bones. Inside of the jar was a complete human skeleton, its bones all mashed together. Oh, fuck, I stammered. This was his answer. I was looking at Mark, spilled across the ground like some carnivore's leftovers. No. Yes! The hermit raised his gloved hands. His eyes shone within the gator's skull. My whole body shook. Sweat poured down my face. This was it. The end. I had my answer, and I would pay the ultimate price for it until I saw him. The boy who had run from the boardwalk so many hours ago. The one I'd been following. It was Mark, still 18 years old, and wearing the same faded jeans and long-sleeve shirt from the night he had disappeared. He looked at me. Then he pointed at something lying against the tent. A gun, a shotgun. I threw the driftwood at the hermit as hard as I could, then sprinted for the tent. 5 feet. 3, 2, 1. I grabbed the gun with shaky hands. There was just enough time to turn. Blood spattered my face. The blast threw the hermit backwards. His 6-foot-tall body fell to the ground with a thud. It all happened so fast. I didn't even realize I'd pulled the trigger until afterwards. Smoke curled from the barrel of the shotgun. I let out a sharp cry. There was half a cough, half a sob. The hermit lay motionless a few feet away. I pumped the shotgun a second time as I stepped towards him, finger still on the trigger. He never got up. Afterwards, I looked all over the camp for Mark, calling out his name, but aside from the split-second moment before the attack, I never saw my brother again. To this day, I wonder if I ever saw him at all. Perhaps it was all nerves. Perhaps my brother was just a manifestation of my intense fear upon finding the real swamp wrecks. Looking back, I'm struck by how similar the hermit's campsite was to the Swiss Family Robinson-style house that Mark and I had imagined that we'd lived in when we were little. Aside from the obscene shrine and jars, of course. The police cornered off the entire site the next day. Aside from Mark, they found the remains of 12 other people. Even the wealthy land developer Jerry Flagler. News vans came from all over. Word of the swamp wreck's discoveries spread internationally. Most importantly, our family finally had a proper burial for my brother that provided some much-needed closure. My parents and I wept for weeks on end. So far, the police have not been able to identify the hermit. Even after analyzing dental records, completing a DNA profile, and sending his picture to various news outlets, there have been numerous theories, of course. Some said that the hermit was Michael Jenkins, an escaped mental patient who vanished from a South Florida asylum 40 years ago, though the photos didn't bear much resemblance. Others claimed various serial killers who had never been caught, like the Zodiac. And some even believed that the hermit was planted by the federal government to cover up the existence of the real creature. But no one came forward with any solid evidence. Nothing verifiable. The hermit has remained as mysterious as the swamp creature that he had pretended to be for so many years. And I've since moved clear across the country. I currently reside in the vast metropolis of Los Angeles. I don't go hiking anymore. I never go camping. I hardly ever even leave the house. But each night I dream. I dream that I'm still deep in that swamp, alone in my cold, reptilian skin. I am the hermit. And the thing that worries me the most is I enjoy it. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to give you a big thank you for sticking with me through the entirety of this video, or podcast episode, or what have you, and for staying with me for the past 10 years. It's been a hell of a ride, and I couldn't do any of it without you. And I want to give a very special thank you to all of you who support me on Patreon, because quite honestly, you guys help me keep the lights on in my house, and I can't thank you enough for that. A very special thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Ken Lando Higuchi, Chompski, Bobby Karman, Nico Kaeo, Tristain Pelton, Chase Burnett, Deanna Kraus, G Weevil 3, Chris Lovin, Freddie Krueger, Dr. Stein and Mr. Happy, Miranda Jeffries, Hugungshi, Justin Johnson, Raven Hart, Unknown Nobody, Michael Scharbrough, Kazan, ThisIsMyRealNameNoShit, Jason VB Wilson, InfernalOne, JimboTheHutt, Caspian, Jordan Nells, Hades' Nephew, Jordan Wayne Deckard, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Someone You Love, S-Man, Kiri the Sloth, Liam Newman, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Nina Smith, Raphael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Paulson, and Corey Kenshin. Thank you guys so much. Like, seriously, thank you guys so much. And if you would like to be able to join them, you always can at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. I love you guys, seriously. All of you who support on Patreon, who follow, who subscribe, those of you who listen, and those of you who lurk. Thank you for the amazing 10 years. And sweet dreams.